We are going to call the fifth meeting of the Unemployment Insurance Reform Task Force to order. At this time, I would like to ask Sasha to call the roll, please.
Senator Alvarado, Senator Storm, Senator Wilson, Senator Yates, Representative Branscombe,
Present in the room.
Representative Cantrell, Representative Pratt,
Present in the room.
Representative Sharp, Co-Chair Nemes,
Present in the room.
Co-Chair Weber.
Present in the room. All right. Do we have a quorum? Okay. At this time, we do lack a quorum, so we will wait on the minutes until we get that additional member present. In the meantime, we're going to move on with our agenda today. We do have a pretty ambitious schedule, and so we want to hop right into that. So at this point, our first item is number 3, unemployment insurance policy recommendations. I would like to ask Secretary Link, Director Hoskinson, and Legislative Director Eves if you'll come forward. Please introduce yourself for the official record. Once you've done that, then you may go ahead and begin your PowerPoint presentation for the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the task force. Thank you for having us today. We'll start off, and again, making introductions. My name is Jamie Link. I'm the Secretary of the Kentucky Labor Cabinet. With me is Buddy Hoskinson, the Executive Director of the Office of Unemployment Insurance, and Ms. Morgan Eves, our Legislative Director at the Labor Cabinet. So, first slide, next slide, please. So you've seen this PowerPoint slide before. You had asked that we update for fiscal year 2021, which we have through the second quarter. You'll see that the last bar on the far right. And what this slide obviously depicts is the extraordinary number of claims that were filed in 2020. Obviously we know a lot of the reasons why. Certainly the COVID-19 pandemic totally exacerbated the system and flooded the unemployment insurance system with a number of claims. And then you'll notice in calendar 2021, excuse me, I said fiscal earlier. In calendar 2021, you'll notice we're at 242,000, which is less than half of the claims that were filed in 2009 during the start of the Great Recession. So we just wanted to give you a pictorial on that and kind of show you how the trend has moved. Next slide.
Good morning. And so we'll go back and give you a couple updates again. As the Secretary said, you can see the number of claims on the slide that we have and how much we've paid to date since March 20 through October 17th, 2021. And then also, if you, with your all's help in the past session, again, you will see that we continue to work the waivers. And again, if you recall, those waivers are available to individuals who had an office error from January the 27th of 2020 through December 31st of 2020. And so I know those numbers there say 6,170, but as of this morning, it's 6,211, and that is gone. The amount is a little point over 9.4 million at this time. So individuals are being able to utilize that and are doing that. Remember and recall that once the individual gets the letter, they are given 30 days in order to make that request. 30 days from the request from the Secretary. Next slide. So in looking at in-person and phone information as far as our calls, since April 15th to October 20th, we have assisted more than 60,000 individuals in person. And again, those appointments become available every day at 9 a.m., Monday through Thursday. And as you can also see, the total number scheduled. Now, one of the good notes that we've talked about in this committee and on this task force is, does everybody have to come to a local office? Do they have to drive all the way across? We started in the past month that now they can just choose to do it in person, and we have 75% of those who schedule appointments now going to versus in person to phone, excuse me. And then if you'll see again in the call center, you will see that I think last month we reported to you about 94 to 95,000 calls. We're up to over 102,000 calls, and we do that in 2 shifts at the call center, Monday through Friday currently from 8 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
So we've talked before about the unemployment insurance computer system that is woefully outdated. I'm glad to report that the RFP for a new replacement system closed on Tuesday, October the 26th, and the Finance and Administration Cabinet, along with the Evaluation Committee, are now undertaking the evaluation of those proposals that were received. I am not a member of that evaluation team, thus I do not know how many proposals were received at this time, and the Finance Administration Cabinet will manage that process as they always do. But as you know, there's an estimated budget of $47.5 million that have been set aside for this project. $30 million of that is through restricted funds, $10 million in bond funds, and then you appropriated $7.5 million in general fund support. After the vendor is selected, we anticipate that it will take anywhere from 18 to 24 months to implement or to develop and implement that new IT system. But in the interim, I would add, we are taking every measure we possibly can to improve upon the existing system with fraud prevention measures and other efficiencies that we can find in upgrading the current system, because obviously we've got 1.5 years or 2 years before the new system will be implemented, and we need to make improvements now.
Okay, last
Secretary
time-
Link, before
go ahead.
Before you move on,
Certainly.
while we're on that page, I do have a question to ask you. At the beginning of your slide presentation, it said due to vendor requests. So
Yes.
I'm assuming that was multiple vendors asked for the delay.
Yes, because the expedited timeframe we were looking to implement that, they felt like a system of this size and complexity. They requested 1 more week to finalize their proposals for us.
Okay, and that
we
came
felt
from,
that was important to get the best proposals we could.
Do you know how many vendors made that request?
I do not. No, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
We do have a question while we're on this subject from Representative Pratt.
Sure.
Thank you, guys. We're talking about the system as you upgrade it. Couple things I looked at. I noticed you reported today, which is great. The numbers are coming down in UI. It's going to take 2 to 3 years to build this system.
Yes, sir.
So what we have right now is adequate. You're telling me for 2 to 3 years. So are we upgrading because we need to or want to?
Representative Pratt, I would submit that, number one, we do need a new system. This system, as you know,
Yes.
several components of it date back to the early 80s or late 70s, as a matter of fact. And it's just not tenable to continue with a system like that going forward. In my first appearance before this task force, I used the term, we're building the church for Easter Sunday, because we can't predict the future, but should another occurrence like this happen, I don't think any of us want to go through another situation like we've gone through the last 18 plus months. So what we're trying to do now is, in the interim, and as obviously with the pandemic hopefully relieving, we're looking at ways that we can continue to improve upon the assets that we do have now. We certainly are suffering, like most employers in Kentucky and across the country, in finding staff to work these claims. So we're looking at anything we can from technology related. We recently put out a vacancy notification to hire 30 additional adjudicators. We had 2 responses. So that's what we want to work with this task force on, are measures that we can take to improve not only the technology that we utilize, but also the staffing. And I'm sure there'll be further discussion on some other measures that we could take, but those will likely require staffing. So we'll be looking at ways that we can work with the General Assembly and work with the administration to improve both of those resources to make it that we don't have this situation again in the future.
And if I may add, the age of the system, as Secretary Link pointed out, is from the late 70s, early 80s. Currently, the way it's coded in COBOL, which is not even a coding system that's taught by IT professionals anymore because it is so outdated. So when something happens with the system and we need a major rework, we have to try to find retired IT staffers because, again, it's just not a coding system that's taught anymore because it's so far outdated. We're not the only state that's had to do this.
Correct.
NPR recently had a story about Delaware that was in the same predicament. But I think that's a good illustration of just how old the system is that we can't even get new IT people who are experienced to work on this coding system.
Yes, I understand it's old. Again, when I say that, maybe I didn't ask the question right. My concern is you've got a 2 to 3 year plus or more. As we know with most government projects, if they say 2 years, it's 5 years. Say 5 years, it's 20 years. We're going to be stuck with the system 2 to 3 years. Is there not a better system, or is there not something we can do other than build it from the ground up? And that's appears what we're doing is building this from the ground up. Can we not get something off the shelf like California, like Texas did, and build and just get it off the shelf, get it up, get it going? Why are we reinventing the wheel?
From the research that I'm aware of, there are no canned systems that address this unemployment insurance that meet both the federal requirements and the state requirements. So there will be obviously a build of this, but it will be built with existing technology. So our hope is, and it's on us to administer these contracts and to hold vendors accountable and responsible for their performance. So my goal is 18 to 24 months. I don't even want to go to 3 years. And, obviously we want to control the cost as well. So in the interim, we certainly don't believe that we'll have the crushing amount of claims that happened in 2020. Thus, it'll be a more manageable population that we can manage with the existing systems and with improvements to those systems that we can hold on until a new system is implemented.
Again, I really would encourage you guys to look at one off the shelf. Again, other states use them. Other states tell me they work fine. Again, I'm afraid we are reinventing the wheel here. We're building it from the ground up. We're not looking at best cost. We're looking at, basically when we could drive a Chevrolet, we're looking for a Mercedes-Benz. So that's my concern, that we're doing it. And that's, again, that I want to make sure we spend our taxpayer dollars wisely in doing this, because this is a lot of money we're getting ready to spend on a system that I think that, at least in my opinion, there's a cheaper way to go. So I'd love you guys to look at that. Hopefully you have looked at that, because we are stewards of taxpayers' dollars, and it's our job to make sure they're spent wisely.
I couldn't agree with you more, Representative Pratt, and I would also add that we communicate regularly with the U.S. Department of Labor and the Region 3 staff, and we are always asking about best practices or what other states are doing to address this issue. And if okay, I'd like to contact you after the meeting and see kind of what some sources you may have heard that we may not know. We feel like we've done an extensive search, but if you've got some further information, I'd love to pick your brain about that.
Love to talk to you. Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
We actually do have a question from Co-Chair Nemes as well.
It's more of an explanation. Representative Pratt brings up a great thing. He's always worried about cost. He's almost as cheap, or let's say frugal, as I am. But being in the cabinet that had unemployment, and formerly in the labor cabinet with workers' comp, that we put in a new system that was not off the shelf, that we built it from the ground up. Sometimes when you buy something off the shelf, you have no ability to update it, and they have the code and you don't. With workers' comp, we took it from ground up, and now we're able to change it as we want. We own the code. So if there is one off the shelf we can use for the future too, that would be great. Now, and then I think he alluded to also, if this system is working now with this big problem, then why do we even need a system? Well, let me answer that, because CNN did a report on former Governor Beshear in 2008, was given money to upgrade the system and did not. So then yes, it was fine and okay for a while, and Governor Bevin decided that it was antiquated, and we were already in process of putting in a new computer system, and there was money by the legislature put in for that. It's just that this COVID hit so quickly and so hard that the now Governor Beshear was in the system was unable to handle it. So by not putting the new system in now, or if we can't find an off-the-shelf appropriate computer system, we're just doing it again, and we're asking for failure again, and it can't handle what ordinary anyway. The system we were trying to put in, and hopefully you are too, will also help with the new career centers.
Yes.
Not just unemployment, put it in and get your unemployment. It will help with careers, and it will help find jobs and a better career for people. So I think that if we handle it properly, that it is a great investment that was already in process, and I think that your concerns, I think, are exactly right, but I think that we need to go on and get this computer system.
And Senator Nemes, I appreciate your comments and couldn't agree more. I'm not an IT professional, obviously, but we do know that a lot of times, and we've all probably experienced this before, with IT systems. To Representative Pratt's comments, they say it's going to be $10 million and take 2 years, and ends up costing $25 million and takes 5 years. And we are aware of that, and we are not going to get back into that situation. But to your point, it's the long-term maintainability of a system as well. And if you buy someone else's code, they own that code. And every time you have to go do something, you have to pay them to manipulate that code. So I appreciate your point that by us owning the system and the code, we will be responsible and have control over our future when it comes to a system like this. So I appreciate that very much.
One question I have before we let Mr. Hoskinson pick up: how much has been spent at this point on upgrades to the system? As of right now, what are we looking at that we've already expended?
I don't have that number in front of me right now, but that's a good question. I can get that information back
Would you
to
get that and supply that to?
Yes, sir.
And when, just for clarification, do you mean, are you referencing federal funds, COVID-related funds, general funds?
I'd be interested in all
in
funds.
all of it? Okay.
All right.
Director Hoskinson.
We're good? All right. Thank you. So just to piggyback on everything that you all have already asked or talked about this morning, is what we mentioned to you last time. We are in the second cohort of the Tiger team, which is having experts from all over the country and through the federal government look at our program and do a deep dive to see where we can make those improvements and what are we doing. What are good practices? What are things that maybe we can adjust and tweak a little bit to get those quick wins? So it's an 8-week process. We kicked off on October the 5th. My team and other leadership members throughout the cabinet are already conducting the interviews and the meetings. We've supplied them. It's almost like another internal audit, if you want to think of it in terms of that process. It's our way to reevaluate. So when we do work refusal, which we do, how are we handling that work refusal? Do we have enough staff resources to do the work refusal once that comes in? Does the employer understand their responsibility to the work refusal? Does the employer know that what happens, and that it doesn't automatically cut somebody's benefits off, but what it does is create the issue for it to be investigated? One item of discussion. You mentioned in the system, Senator Nemes, about matching to the jobs. We do have Focus Career right now, but Focus Career is already several administrations in time frame. And so let's think about what it needs to be today to do those cross matches and to look at those skill gaps that individuals have. And that's what a part of the Tiger team is doing. And then obviously we're also looking at integrity of our programs, as that's so important, as we've had so many imposters and so much fraud coming across the country. So we do partner with NASWA, our national organization, with IDH to do cross matches. We do already look at banking and routing numbers to see if there are certain banks that pull out, which we've already stopped. If you recall back in early April, that's the reason why we shut down for 4 or 5 days, is to do those PIN resets, to put that dual authentication process in to make sure that you are who you are. You asked about software or vendor programs. ID.me. ID.me was something that we are one of about 24, 25 other states in this country that have started using ID.me. That's a federally certified program that the IRS uses. ID.me currently sits in the middle of our program of a claim to validate who you are and that we know that who you are. ID.me is getting ready to launch on November 4th in front of everything. So that's one more protection for the claimant and one more protection for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So what that means is if you have already registered through ID.me, you will log in every time through ID.me, and that will move you into your claim. If you have not registered through ID.me, you will have to do that in order to even go or start a claim. So to the point of the backlog or to the work that we have existing, Representative Pratt, this will create multiple issues being created. Because if you haven't cleared that first clearinghouse, you go nowhere. That claim is not valid. And so that in itself will be a great tool for us. If we could have the next slide, please. So some of the things that you ask us to come back, what are things that we can do to assist or that you could do to assist us? And so what we're going to tell you is assist us with probably the short-time compensation program. What we want to do is help employers, but help the claimant as well. And as you see right there, it prevents layoffs by allowing employers to have reduced hours rather than laying them off. When you lay off somebody, you have the potential of losing that skilled workforce. What we're trying to do is to build that, not allow that to happen. So we would create an application, much like we've done in other programs, to submit from the employers to the cabinet that we could review and make sure it's approval. So when those employers need to use that service, we can then enact those because we know that they're already a part of an approval process and they already understand. We will have already educated them to know what they need to do next. Go ahead to the next slide, I'm sorry, because I may have jumped a little bit ahead, so I apologize. So a total of 27 other states already do this. Per the United States Department of Labor, when we sought out the feedback, we would have to have a statutory change. And so you see that on the third bullet, KRS 341-0803, expanding the definition of partial employment compensation would be necessary. We would need, just like with the work refusal, as you all make changes and as we work together to make those changes, we're going to need staff to do that. A part of the opportunity has been that we are short-staffed and we are trying to skill staff up. Secretary Link mentioned about only 2 adjudicators coming in. You don't walk off the street being an adjudicator. It takes a good amount of process of time to understand UI law in order to do so. Next slide. Again, the idea here is to the short-time compensation is to keep that skilled workforce, help them be spared, and help the employer continue to be able to, when they recover, continue and gain again. Employers avoid the expense of recruiting, hiring, and as we all know right now, that is a hard thing in the Commonwealth and across this country, is to recruit. We want to help their business conditions by giving them this opportunity. So, not to keep on going, Secretary Link, but I'm going to keep moving this. So the overpayment, go ahead, Representative Pratt, I'm sorry.
On the short-time compensation right here, the money that's paid, does that still count against the employer's account? Does it, as you know, the more unemployment you file or have people file for, the higher your UI rate goes up that the employer pays in. Will this also be the same? It will still go against the employer's account, which makes, again, I'm for it, but do they understand that when they do this, their UI account's going to go up and they're going to have to pay more into the system? Is this the way it's set up?
Yes, sir. There would still be a charge to that. Again, we're just talking about a prorated because you're talking less money ultimately going out. So there's still going to be a charge because you've got to also take care of your system, right? You've got to build back into the system. And that's a confusion that many claimants don't understand, is that you, as I know you live in I live in your district and you have a business, you pay into that every day for that employee that you have. The employee does so in a roundabout way by working for you. Yes.
And I realize the more that when and if we lay someone off, our rate's going to go up. And I think most employers realize that. So this is an interesting concept. Again, we need to look at this a little bit harder, but yes, sir.
Yes, we would love to have that conversation with you.
I believe, too, if I'm not mistaken, that the employer is the party that files.
Yes.
Correct.
Not the employee.
The employer is the one who files for that program.
because they want to retain those employees and not lose those skills.
Thanks, Morgan. Okay, so the overpayment waiver. You all helped us tremendously by helping the citizens of the Commonwealth, as I started at the beginning of this conversation today that we're having with Senate Bill 7. And again, we have the dates of January 27th, 2020 through December 31st, 2020. If at no fault of their own and it was an office error, then they have that ability to have that waiver. The Secretary gives them a notice through a letter and also on their account that they have 30 days to apply for that waiver. We started that program back in June of this year and continue as we work people through the backlog and through our adjudication process. If they're eligible and they were in that time frame, they still have that opportunity. What we would like to see is how do we continue that and help that? So Senate Bill 7 created some issues in timing for appeals, finality in the UI adjudication, and the Cabinet is asking legislation to clean up the provisions. Next slide. So with that, what we're asking is, so let's go back and revisit that topic again and make sure that we have all the things, all the I's and all the T's the way that we need to, so that A, we stay in compliance and that we're able to serve the citizens of the Commonwealth when there are errors. And so we will be wanting and seeking some additional assistance with how we are able to move forward through a waiver, because right now we are one of the few states who do not have that ability. That's all I have for you all this morning.
Thank you. I do have a couple of folks that had questions, and I want to get to those right now. Representative Branscombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. Had a question, and I believe it was slide 4 when it's showing the in-person and phone data. One of the numbers that I'm looking at here is the PIN assistance, and it looks like 64,851. I guess first, can you just, as brief as you can, explain the PIN system? The PIN, can you explain that just real quick? Because that's going to lead to my follow-up question.
Yes. So that was what we did back in April. When we took the system down to verify the person, we put in that authentication, and so they now had to get a PIN. And so we spent 14 days in early April taking that down and sending out those notices for everybody to do that. So a big part of that number is that first 14 days, and then obviously those who are coming into the system who've never had the system, maybe don't understand how to set the PIN, even though we have videos and tutorials, they call in for that assistance.
Okay, that was leading to my follow-up, because I'm sitting here looking at the claim assistance sitting at 37,000, and then looking at PIN assistance at 64,000. So not quite double, but almost double the number of issues there. And I'm sitting there looking at like, well, if we can get the PIN issue cleaned up, that should free up some
So it's a one button or
for
two
claim.
button that you push on the phone to get that assistance, so we know who's receiving that call, what they're needing. And so oftentimes that will, if you go into it today, they are really just going in totality of that claim. So if it is a PIN assistance, they'll do it. If they need a little bit more assistance to something else, they do it too. That's just how we have it broken down in our AWS system when we report out.
One more, Mr. Chairman.
Branscombe.
Thank you. I guess my last question is the waiver. I believe you said we're up to around 6,200 claims that have been processed. Do we know how many have been denied? And the reason I'm asking is because I want to make sure these are being thoroughly vetted and that they're being checked out.
Yes, I believe the last time that I pulled that number about a week or so ago, we were about 700 that didn't either complete the affidavit appropriately, didn't check the box, didn't sign the box, or didn't maybe understand. So before they're completely denied, as you said, we are vetting them through appeals.
Okay.
And so if they didn't check a box, we're calling them and asking, did you really understand what you were meaning? And then also if they flat out did the wrong thing, then yes, we go ahead and move those to the appeal bracket.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Yates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. They just answered my question. I appreciate it.
Good deal. Thank you. Representative Sharp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions here.
You may proceed.
Thank you for you guys appearing today. And first thing I want to say is I got my first call talking about what a pleasurable experience they had at the Ashland Unemployment Office getting things taken care of. Good. So things are moving in the right direction. The complaints have dropped off, and I've gotten actually a positive feedback. First question I got is, what is the backlog now at this time?
So I knew that was probably coming. So I made sure I pulled the numbers again. So when we look at, we have about 84,000 claimants in total. We have about 60,000 claimants who have, now let us remember that you may have multiple issues within your claim or repeat issues. We have 60,000 of those that are basically in the UI and about another 3,800 of those in the PEUC program underneath the pandemic, and in the pandemic unassistance program, about another 20,000 of those in that totality of number.
All right. The follow-up question I have to that is, what is the plan, or do you have goals or gates set to take care of these these backlog?
Yes, sir. So first, thank you for the compliment, because again, I think staff don't hear that often, so we appreciate that very much. So when the Career Centers opened up in April, we started training staff in order, as you all recall, we were not in the unemployment. The Career Centers didn't have UI for a number of years in the offices, so we introduced that back in. So many of those individuals who come in, and they are on the list to be adjudicated or to have issues, they are seen right then and there. What I will tell you, one of the things that we do see that we're trying to work on now is that tends to push them up and maybe some older claims down. So what we're trying to do is come up with a plan that, and we are working on that right now, that we can focus on what is left in 2020. We've been drilling down in multiple sessions on what are like issues, what are repeat issues, what are things that we can then send back to the claimant and say, if you don't move on this issue, we are going to suspend your claim because we see no activity coming from. We are working on, as I introduced last committee meeting, the new summary page that again would tell you, sir, that if you were looking at your page, these are the 4 things outstanding from you, here's what we're waiting on, and vice versa, the same thing back. Those are all good things that we're working on now, and hopefully we'll have launched very soon. The ID Me moving to the front will be a tremendous help to our system because it will not allow a recreation of an issue because you won't even be able to get through. But our focus is, how do we resolve out of the 2020? We know from April of 21 to now, what we did with the PIN reset helped tremendously. What we're doing on November 4th, well, again, as the Secretary says, we're building that church for Easter Sunday, will help us even more so in 2022, excuse me. Our goal now is, how do we pull all of those 20 issues? And we've already started calling. If you all recall, we did work all of March and April's, but it doesn't mean that it eradicates all of March and April's. You could have initially started your claim there, we've got you resolved, and you've reopened, but it shows back up as a March of 2020. So we have to go back in and move. There is some flexibility in fluctuation of that. So what we're trying to do is, we've called all of those folks left in March of 2020 just to verify, to make sure. We're now doing that into the April and May. And our goal is to put that team together, our adjudicators. As the Secretary said, we have 30 to 35 members at any given time. Put them in with our help desk team members, our folks who do the pandemic assistance, because more times than not, you just filed and you filed in the wrong bucket, is what I will say. You filed in UI when you should have been PUA. And that's what we're trying to get those. So as many of those like issues that we can resolve, we're trying to get those moved. And we have a requirement by law to analytically look through all of those. But if they are like issues and we can agree to those issues, we can create a script for the system to go in and put to a closure. Once that is put to a closure, that gives that individual a determination, a decision, and it allows them to appeal if they want to. That's their right.
All right. So with the outstanding claims, do you have, like, you're going to try and handle 7,000, 8,000 a month to get that backlog? I mean, do you have a goal like that?
I know right now
up?
with my current staff, I can do about 3,000 a week.
3,000 a week?
3,000 a week. And I know Senator Alvarado asked this about 2 meetings ago. How many more staff do you need of that? That's what we represented to Secretary Link. I could use that many more people, if not more, to come on and start hiring and scaling up to be able to do that. With the current workload and the current procedures in which we have to follow with compliance with the law, that's what it allows us to get to at this moment.
So approximately 12,000 a month?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you indulge me, I know you find it amazing, but I have several questions. Thank you, guys. Secretary Link, in a follow-up on September 28th meetings, you confirmed that the Kentucky Career Centers, KCCs, are under the jurisdiction of the Labor Cabinet and not the Education Workforce Development Cabinet. It is my understanding that KCCs are mandated under the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act that program actually remain in EWDC. Can you explain why your agency feels they have jurisdiction? Further, can you describe labor's role in providing reemployment services to UI claimants, specifically under the Wagner-Peisner program and a partner in the KCC?
The Career Development Office was reorganized, I believe, last August of 2020, and came under the Kentucky Labor Cabinet. Within those Kentucky Career Centers, there are multiple functions that are performed there. One of those is the Workforce Innovation, which is we call WIOA, W-I-O-A. That is still managed by the Education Workforce Development Cabinet. However, in those centers are also unemployment insurance assistance, as well as the Wagner-Peisner services that are managed by the Career Development Office and the Kentucky Labor Cabinet. We are working and have been working very collaboratively with Education Workforce Development to have, I think all of our goals here is to make unemployment insurance a much less substantial issue and focus more on reemployment. So when that unemployment insurance claimant walks into those career centers and they file their claim, we want to push them into the Wagner-Peisner services for training or into the WIOA services for training and reemployment. We're also working with local employers in those regions to marry those unemployment insurance claimants with potential job opportunities. If they're not trained for those job opportunities, that's where Wagner-Peisner and WIOA come into play. So it's a holistic approach that these centers should be one-stop shops, if you will, to get people back into the workforce and reemployed.
Interesting. All right. Thank you, sir. When labor or UI receives a complaint reports, monitoring reports, or audits from the federal government, where do these reports go? Are they available for public view on a website, or do we have to do open record requests to see them?
I may ask my colleagues for assistance. What I can tell you, to my personal knowledge, we are meeting with the U.S. Department of Labor on a bi-weekly basis from a governance level. Deputy Secretary Mary Pat Regan from Education Workforce Development and myself meet with the leadership of the Region 3 staff from the U.S. Department of Labor on a bi-weekly basis to address any and all issues that we're facing. And then there are subgroups that are meeting with USDOL to address more targeted specific issues. So the reporting has been an issue, and we are working diligently on that to improve the reporting. I think USDOL, from the feedback I'm getting, is very pleased with the collaboration that is taking place between the two cabinets, because it's all focused on the employment issues. So we have to work together in order to make that report and the data that supports those reports available to them. Regarding the transparency, it's certainly public record. I'll have to get back to you on what the mechanics of that is, whether it would require a Freedom of Information Act request through the federal government, a Kentucky Open Records request, or we certainly are continuing to look at how we can take more transparency measures and get those available through like the dashboard that Director Hoskinson talked about, to have that information there for anybody to see.
So basically right now, if we want to get those, we have to go through open record requests.
Representative, I believe the answer to your question is because it's work product of whatever agency is issuing the audit results, you would go through that agency, not necessarily our cabinet. However, we're happy to provide you with that answer. For instance, if it was a USDOL audit, that's their work product, so you would have to go to them for the audit report. We're happy to look into that, see if there's a way we can make it easier to access for not only you all, but the public at large.
The problem with someone like me who's outside looking in, there's too many steps to find out what is going on, and that's what I'm saying is let's make it simplistic here. Let's make it transparent. Let's let the people see what's actually going on here.
We agree.
Yes, sir. Since March 2000, you have UI adjudants have been performed to non-merit state employees. Was there a federal waiver for this? Is this still going on?
So we did have, in the first part of the pandemic, the federal legislation did give us, federal guidelines gave us flexibility, a waiver for that. That ended on September the 4th over Labor Day weekend. They have not extended that. States have asked for that, but that has not been extended. So what happens is everybody who was not considered merit in the state of Kentucky as either a merit or FFTL can no longer do any functions other than administrative work.
So they're no longer doing those.
They're no longer allowed to do those by the federal government.
Okay. All right. And I know what the answer is going to be, but I'm going to ask it again. What happened to the 37 state employees who fraudulently filed UI benefits worth approximately $117,000? And what protocols are being put in place to prevent this happening? And we're going to talk about this a little bit more. None were prosecuted. 1 was fired. 8 were briefly suspended and then returned to their jobs. I can tell you, as a business owner, I have policy and procedures in place that says you steal, you're fired. How in God's name was this allowed to happen? What have you done to stop this? And how do we allow people to steal, basically do fraudulent things and still be employed for the state? They stole money from taxpayers, and now they're still getting paid by taxpayers. How did this happen? And I know you're going to tell me you can't talk on personnel matters, but this was an open records request. We have it in front of us.
Representative, I'll let my colleagues speak to the policies and procedures, but as to the prosecution, certainly that's not something we can control. Those were referred to the local law enforcement officials who chose not to prosecute those actions.
Well, actually, there was a comment by the judge, which I probably need to talk about. Cleveland said when the governor came and said, we're not going to have to pay the money back, Cleveland said, then I'm thinking, well, so what am I doing here? This is really worth my time when I've got murder and robbery cases. There are a few of them that were clearly the people knew what they were doing and was clearly fraud. Cleveland said, but given the sums in question and the fact that the governor wasn't pursuing it, I just couldn't consider it the best use of my time to prosecute them. How can we allow these people off? I mean, they have stolen money from taxpayers and they're still working, getting paid by taxpayers.
Representative Pratt, we have our general counsel here because we assumed this question could come up.
Yes.
And we want to make sure that we answer it as appropriately as we can within the law, because I don't want to talk to Mr. Cleveland. So I'm going to invite our general counsel, Mr. Sam Flynn, to come up and address your question.
Good morning, Representative, and thank you for your question.
Mr.
I do want to go back.
Mr. Flynn, will you introduce yourself for the record so we can connect?
Yes, my name is Sam Flynn. I'm General Counsel and Inspector General for the Labor Cabinet. And Representative Pratt, I do want to go back to a question you asked earlier about the KCCs before I answer your question. The General Assembly moved the KCC to the purview of the Labor Cabinet. I believe it was this session, and that's codified at 336-045. So, as to your question, the Kentucky Labor Cabinet received Inspector General report from the Transportation Office of Inspector General in February of 2021. That investigation was called by the governor and the lieutenant governor in May of 2020. Of the individuals, there were 34 that were named in the Inspector General's report. 35 that were named in the Inspector General's report. 31 of those individuals were interviewed. 4 of them were not. The 4 that were not, of those, 3 of them were determined that they had not filed an unemployment insurance claim. 1 of those individuals no longer was in state government and had filed a claim, but obviously not during their time in state government. Of the remaining individuals, 17, all of those 31 had filed claims. Not all of them worked in the Office of Unemployment Insurance. 17 of them received benefits. All of those individuals received benefits because of the auto pay, not because they had worked their own claim. As you had mentioned, one of the individuals, and this was the only individual that looked at their own claim and actually got in and what I would say is took action with respect to their own claim. In this case, they put a stop on their claim so that they could not be paid. That individual was dismissed from state service. The remainder of those individuals were reviewed for any appropriate personnel action. The individuals that were disciplined, several of them were disciplined because they had filed a claim, had access to the UI system, and looked at their own claim or looked at the claims of other individuals. With respect to individuals who filed a claim, and if you believe, Representative Pratt, that they were not entitled to unemployment insurance benefits, those individuals were, again, named in the OIG report, and that report was referred to the Auditor of Public Accounts, the Executive Branch Ethics Commission. It was provided to the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, and it was provided to the Office of the Attorney General. As my colleague, Ms. Eves, mentioned, no prosecution has occurred with respect to those individuals. The Labor Cabinet can only refer the matter to a criminal prosecutor. We cannot take any action to require that prosecutor to then prosecute individuals. Okay? The prosecutor has to determine that there is enough evidence that these individuals actually intended to defraud the unemployment insurance system.
Okay, and one thing you said is they looked at their own records, which, if I remember correctly from Auditor Harmon's report, was you're not allowed to look at your own claimant. That's actually they broke one of the policies right there. But I guess what my question is, not whether or not they were prosecuted, is how in God's little green acres can we have people stealing? So I need to go tell the state employees, go take things out of your office, take them home. There's no consequence for this. Not only are you not going to be prosecuted, you're not going to be terminated by this state. You're allowed to steal from the state, and there's no consequences. Forget the prosecution. How are they still employed?
Representative,
and I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a business owner. So sorry about that.
Representative, I appreciate your question, and I think you may be confusing the issue a little bit by saying that individuals stole from the state. Individuals filed claims, and let's take this out of the context of OUI for the moment. Let's say a state employee that works in Pike County files an unemployment insurance claim, in this case based on the federal program related to a secondary job. Let's say that they're a bartender in a second job. That individual could be filing in good faith based on the loss of income because that bar was closed during the pandemic. Okay, it's a very brand new federal system that was enacted in, I believe it was March 30 of 2020. So brand new federal programs, brand new requirements, and also with respect to the pandemic unemployment assistance program, it allowed greater flexibility for individuals who did have full-time jobs to be able to file on a part-time job. So individuals that work in state government or work in a private business that have secondary jobs could have, in good faith, filed on a part-time job and received benefits. That was allowed under the federal system. Okay, so when you're talking about individuals who filed that work in state government, those individuals, yes, they may have had a full-time job, but could have filed in good faith on a part-time job that they had in addition. As I mentioned before, many of the individuals, in fact, all of the individuals that filed here filed, some of them may have not been in good faith. Some of them may have. However, those individuals filed and were paid as a result of the auto pay. And only 17 of the 31 were paid. They were paid some $54,000, and every one of those individuals has received a determination that they were overpaid.
Well, again, there were some consequences for the employees. I've got 2 that were suspended for 1 day, if my math is correct, 4 that were suspended for 3 days, 5 that were suspended for 5 days, and actually the one state employee you said was fired because of consequences said issues unrelated to investigation include improper use of a state vehicle, speeding up to 91 miles per hour in a state vehicle, filing false timesheets, and having inappropriate materials on his state computer according to his personnel file. They worked in the Unemployment Insurance Integrity Branch.
That individual, Representative, again, was dismissed as a result of actions unrelated to the OIG
That's
report.
Right.
The individual who I referred to earlier, who was dismissed because or was dismissed. That individual was the only one who had looked at their own claim and placed a stop on their claim. That individual was dismissed.
But even at that, and I think you guys said, your policy is you're not even allowed to look at your own claim.
That's correct.
Whether they put a stop on or not, the fact they did that actually broke the rules.
That's correct, and every individual who did that was disciplined.
Again, they filed fraudulently. Guys, I'm extremely concerned that we're setting a very bad message to people. I can tell you at Pratt's Lawn Landscape, you use my company material or take something, it states very plainly in my policy procedure manual, you will be terminated. It's not you could be, you will be terminated. This sets a very bad precedent that these people are allowed to return to work after gaming the system.
Representative, I do want to address your comment briefly. I think we're conflating two separate things. The first being individuals that may or may not have looked at their own claim. Those are obviously a matter of policy within the Office of Unemployment Insurance and certain statutes and regulations that we have, as well as federal guidance that says you cannot look at your own claim. Those individuals that did look at their own claim, those individuals were disciplined. With respect to the secondary issue is individuals who filed a claim that worked in state government and may or may not have filed in good faith or bad faith. The individuals that filed in bad faith, again, this report was referred to the appropriate law enforcement agencies for further investigation if necessary, and any appropriate criminal action against those individuals. That was done by our office. No, to my knowledge, no further criminal investigation or prosecution is ongoing at this point. So I just want to make sure that we're very clear that those are two separate things.
Again, if I fire someone, more than likely the county attorney is not going to prosecute them for me. So the fact they weren't charged, the fact that they're still working bothers me.
Well, and we will always follow all appropriate personnel cabinet guidelines when it comes to disciplinary action. I will always do that. I always have and always will.
Okay. Again, I think we're going to agree to disagree on the fact that we allow these people to game the system and they're still employed. And I think some of them, looking at the open record request we got, clearly knew they weren't allowed to do this. Clearly knew they were stepping outside the bounds. Anybody who has a full-time job and files unemployment benefits on a part-time job surely knows you cannot do that. If you're gainfully employed full-time.
Representative, that was allowed under the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program.
By the governor or by the federal?
That's a federal program that was passed, I believe, March 30th, 2020, and signed by President Trump.
Interesting. Okay. But again, I'm extremely concerned with the lack of discipline for these employees. So thank you guys. Appreciate your time on this. But I got more questions. I know you guys find that. All right. Exactly what do claimants have to do to fulfill each job search requirement? And my question is, years ago, I was talking to some people who used to draw unemployment. Now you're down to one contact a week. It used to be 3. Why not 3 again? Why are we at 1?
I think we'll let Betty come back up and address that.
I appreciate y'all's patience with all my questions.
As long as the chair's happy, we're happy.
So you're right. We have one contact per week, and that has been that way for probably at least 12 years. With that, having to do one search, I think what we talked about earlier today is what is that activity? We've talked about, and I think Mr. Horvath has mentioned too, other states may be doing, Kentucky being one of the lowest numbers that you heard from before, to some doing 5. But again, it's what are those valid activities that can be validated, and I think to his words also can be proved. I think that's something that we have to work together as a group and determine how are we going to tackle that with the resources we have in order to validate that. So if you have someone, and I think we've talked about that before, how do I validate what you've reported as a good employer, and I get something opposite from the individual that you're reporting? We then have to validate and determine what is the credible answer. And again, that all is appealable if we make that determination.
And I think this goes back to a factor of resources.
It does.
it takes people to investigate whether that's a valid issue or not. And we try to do the best we can with the resources we do have.
Well, I can tell you, I asked my office manager point blank, are you aware that when someone comes, and my production manager, are you aware that when someone comes in and applies for a job and refuses it, that we need to report to state? Both of them looked at me straight in the eye and said, no, really? I said, we are required, we're supposed to be turning this in. And their two replies was, A, we don't have time for this. B, why is the state asking us to do this? Why don't they reach out to us? But the fact they weren't aware of it lets me know we're not getting the word out, guys. Make no doubt about it. Employers are unaware this is part of the requirement. And if you're truly unemployed, I think 1 a week is a little low. Actually, I think it's really low. I think 5 would be a great number. Actually, I'm okay with 10 or 12. But again, I think they need to be looking for work as hard as they can. So thank you for that.
Representative Pratt,
yeah.
I've got two more presenters after this, and I have one question from Representative Sharp, and I'm going to ask you if you can hold your questions.
I will refer to next time we meet again,
And
guys.
certainly,
And we don't
Chairman
disagree.
And Representative Pratt, if you have questions for us, feel free to call me.
Yeah.
Or send me an email with questions you have, and we'll respond.
Thank you all for being very patient.
Representative Sharp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is for Mr. Flynn. Do I understand correctly that you are the General Counsel and the Inspector General?
Oh, wow.
That's correct. In an acting capacity, our Inspector General, was formerly Mike Wright. That individual left to go to another cabinet in June, and I'm serving in an acting capacity.
What is the job description of the Inspector General for the Labor Cabinet?
So the Inspector General for the Labor Cabinet provides Inspector General services. So whether that be on a human resources basis or on a programmatic inspection basis for the Labor Cabinet, for the Public Protection Cabinet, and for the Energy Environment Cabinet.
And some of those services, I see this as a conflict. Those two hats conflict, and that person cannot be in the same position. I mean, am I reading that right?
I would have to ask you some more questions about what you consider a conflict.
Well, the
or
Inspector
why that
General
would
is
be a
supposed to
conflict.
be the watchdog of the Labor Cabinet leadership, but yet you're the advocate for the Labor Cabinet leadership.
So the Inspector General, as the statute's written, the Inspector General serves as the executive director of the Office of Inspector General, which is in the Office of the Secretary. So in point of fact, the Inspector General serves at the behest of the Cabinet Secretary. And so when the Cabinet Secretary, for example, might ask the Inspector General to look into whatever program may need additional review, that is the duty of the Inspector General.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn.
Yes.
I want to thank you all for your presentation today.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
your,
you.
your comments and your time. We are now going to move on to our next. We do have a quorum present. Can I receive a motion to approve the minutes? We have a motion from Representative Pratt, second from Senator Nemus. All those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. The minutes are adopted. We'll now move on to item number 4 on our agenda. Kate Shanks, Vice President for Public Affairs for the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, will be presenting via Zoom. Kate, if you'll introduce yourself for the record and then go ahead and jump right into your presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me okay in there?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Thank you so much, Chairman, members of the task force. I'm Kate Shanks, Senior Vice President of Public Affairs for the Kentucky Chamber, and I had planned to be with you in person today, but unfortunately, I cannot be there in person. So thank you so much, Chairman, for allowing me to present via Zoom. I really appreciate that because we do have some important recommendations, and I think I'm going to speak a little bit about some of what you all have just been discussing and what some of our recommendations are on those issues. So I think it's very timely for us to present this. As you know, Chairman, members of the task force, the Chamber has been engaged on unemployment insurance reform issues for a while now. We started on this a few years before the pandemic actually hit in Kentucky. And so we looked at some legislation and supported different bills so that we could make reforms to the system. And then the pandemic hit, and we somewhat transitioned into emergency mode or crisis mode with the unemployment insurance system. So last year we focused on what do we need to do to address the emergency situation, the crisis situation we have with the unemployment insurance system. And today I'm going to talk about a couple of recommendations that are still dealing with the crisis, but also are a little bit more forward thinking and how we can make changes to the system just to really put us on the right track in terms of our workforce challenges and getting people back to work as quickly as possible. So I want to start out by saying thank you for the bold actions that you took during the 2021 legislative session to deal with the crisis that the pandemic created. It was very important what you did, specifically House Bill 382 and paying off the federal loan that Kentucky took out to pay benefits was significant. We started at the pandemic with over $600 million in the trust fund. We ended 2019 with about $620 million in the trust fund. And that was quickly spent down. And then we had to take out a loan from the federal government for, I think we ended up around $500 million from that loan. Paying off that loan was significant because it avoids interest and penalties on employers. And it helps us build back that trust fund faster. And so that was very important and we greatly appreciate it. House Bill 413, Chairman, freezing the UI tax was significant as well. We supported that. We appreciated that. We were looking at moving from Schedule A to Schedule E essentially overnight because of the health of the trust fund. And that would have amounted to, on average, $100 per employee tax increase because of that tax code change. So freezing it at Schedule A, I think, was really important to really stop the bleeding and the hits to employers as we were in the midst of the pandemic and some of the worst of the pandemic. And then it was mentioned Senate Bill 7 and the waiver, but there were also provisions in that bill dealing with fraud and making sure that the new UI system would address some of those fraud issues. And I'm happy to report, this is not a data point, but just anecdotally, the numbers of calls and emails that we had been getting in about fraud and what to do about fraudulent claims have greatly slowed. It has been a while since I have gotten one of those calls or emails. So hopefully we've reversed those trends and are on the right track with some of that and are very eager to see what can be done with the new system as well. And then of course, this task force I think is important in keeping a spotlight on these issues and making sure we're making additional reforms going forward. So I'm going to focus for a bit on the trust fund. You've heard me talk about this quite a bit, especially this time last year. And we aren't quite where we were at the start of the pandemic. So based on some of our numbers, I think we're around 300 million or so in the trust fund. I know that number fluctuates as benefits are paid out and as tax revenues come in from employers. And if you think that we were about, 600 million at the start of the pandemic, maybe even a little bit higher, we still have about a $300 million gap there. So we do request that you consider additional funds for the trust fund to get us back to where we were before the pandemic hit. And potentially this could be federal ARPA funds, some other funds that are available, but we think it's really important to get us back to that number for a couple of reasons. What we ultimately want to see with the trust fund is that we get to something called trust fund adequacy, and specifically like a solvency level that the U.S. Department of Labor identifies is healthy for a trust fund. We were about 57% of the way there before the pandemic hit, and we had been crawling out of a hole from the Great Recession. So if we can get back to pre-pandemic levels quickly, then employers, as they're paying in taxes, can build back up that trust fund to get us to that trust fund adequacy level. And when that happens, we have the lowest taxes in some cases that I believe some employers wouldn't even have to pay in. And then if there is a downturn in the economy, we don't have to pay interest if we have to take out a loan. So there's a lot of benefits to being at that level. And it's not unlike thinking about a budget reserve trust fund and then having those funds available when there is a downturn and making sure that we can provide those benefits. We haven't been at trust fund adequacy, I believe, since the 70s. And really only one state, Pennsylvania, has had a longer duration of not being at that level than Kentucky. So that is one of our goals. And I think getting us back to those pre-pandemic levels that then employers can continue to pay in through revenues, I think is going to be important. We also have a long history, and some of these bills were mentioned. I think Senator Nemes mentioned a couple of these. We worked on In 2018, House Bill 252, which created the Service Capacity Upgrade Fund. And we supported that bill to siphon a little bit of money away from the trust fund into this special fund so that we could rebuild the system and improve the technology of the system. So we've known for, since before the pandemic that we needed to make improvements to the trust fund system, to that portal. And the cabinet spoke to this and what some of the challenges are with the coding and the age of the system. And we were happy to support that bill, and unfortunately couldn't get it done before the pandemic hit. We also, Chairman Weber, worked with you on House Bill 317 in 2019, Co-Chair Nebus when you were at the cabinet. And so this is legislation that looked at some of the benefit changes, the duration of weeks, and this concept we had that if you're going to be getting the same payment every week while you're on unemployment, would it be helpful to get a little bit more in the first few weeks and then have it taper down to encourage you to get into reemployment more quickly? And so we think that this legislation is something that warrants additional discussion, and we're happy to continue to explore that going forward. But I do want to highlight a couple of new recommendations in addition to all of these. And the first one, I unfortunately don't have details yet on this particular recommendation, but I will get you the details. Our unemployment insurance tax framework could use some improvements. And I know we worked on the tax schedule last year and freezing it at Schedule A, and we think that there's probably more work that we can do here to improve the tax structure. We have brought in the Tax Foundation, which is a national nonpartisan organization that works with states to improve business tax competitiveness. And so in addition to looking at things like corporate tax and LLET and property tax and inventory tax, income tax, they also look at the state's unemployment insurance tax structure. You don't hear a lot about this, but in Kentucky, we are ranked 49th in the nation. So we do believe that there are going to be some improvements that, but we know that they're going to be recommending. We expect to get that report at the end of November. And so I do hope we can come together in December and kind of roll up our sleeves and think through how we can make some changes to the tax structure of the UI system. And I'm happy to reach back out to task force members and have those conversations and of course share these details with you. But the fact that we're 49th in the nation, I think we can make some improvements here. And then the remainder of my recommendations today are around the work search requirement. So I'm happy that we've started having this discussion, and Representative Pratt, I'm going to talk about some things that I think you're going to be really interested in. But just to give you a little bit of context here, as you all know, the Kentucky Chamber has been focused on our workforce challenges. And you know these challenges as small business owners, you've experienced them, as consumers, you've experienced them. We published our report, 20 Years in the Making, Kentucky's Workforce Crisis, a few weeks ago. We have testified before committee on this. You should all have a copy of this report. And what we have seen over the last 2 decades is the trend in participation moving in the wrong direction. We have dropped from 63.5% in January of 2000 all the way down to 56.4%. We're moving in the wrong direction here. And just a reminder, workforce participation is the percentage of our working population that is either working or is looking for work. And so what we've seen is that in addition to those troubling trends is that we typically trail the nation on average by 4 percentage points. And then we also, compared to other states, we don't do well. And we have the 3rd worst workforce participation rate in the nation. I don't believe these numbers or statistics are probably new, and you've heard these, you've heard us testify to these. If we're talking to the media or presenting any information, we are talking about our workforce challenges. And we know that there's a variety of reasons for these. But in addition to all of those reasons, we look at the unemployment insurance system in our report. And what we have found, and I think these numbers are pretty troubling, and these numbers are not new. They're from 2019, before the pandemic. But in 2019, the national average for how long someone who is unemployed receives unemployment benefits was 14.8 weeks. For states that surround Kentucky, it was 13.3. And in Kentucky, we were at 18.2 weeks as that average. This was the longest average benefit duration in the country. So I think we have some work to do here. And what we are focusing on is what we can do to help Kentuckians become reemployed. Those work search requirements are not new. They've been around since the 30s. All states have them, but they are not all the same across the states. And under our current system, As was already discussed, a claimant is required to submit one job contact per week when making their biweekly benefit requests. And they're also required to search for suitable work that's comparable to a previous job, terms of skills, experience, and wages. And there are exemptions to this, such as if you have a definite recall date. So we have several recommendations related to work search. The first one is the notion of job contact. We think that this needs to be redefined as work search activities. And then we think we need to define work search activities very broadly to reflect what is involved in a modern day work search. So some things like formally submitting a job application, either online or in person, being interviewed virtually, in person, or in a group setting, job shadowing, attending a job fair or network potentially hosted by a local chamber or some other business association, participating in job search skills workshops and seminars. We're seeing this in other states where there are virtual seminars that people can participate in as one of their work search requirements. And then participating in official career center or partner programs related to job search. We think that this is something that could be really helpful for people to not only find jobs, but to improve their work search skills as well. And then in addition to that, and Representative Pratt, you mentioned this number as well, we think it needs to be increased. And we would suggest at least 5 work search activities per week to continue to receive benefits. This is in line with states like Florida, Wisconsin, Utah, Arizona, Nebraska. And there's multiple ways that you could potentially structure this. So perhaps you'd want so many of those to be actual job applications versus participating in a work search training. But that's something that we think would be helpful to just getting more activity along work search. We think, again, the one job contact per week is a fairly weak goal for a modern day job search. We also think that we need to look at the definition of suitable work. Under state law, the cabinet must consider various criteria in determining what is or is not suitable. This includes their previous wages, employment history, background, and skills. In other states, the definition of suitable work will change the longer someone is on unemployment. In New York, for example, after 10 weeks of receiving unemployment benefits, that definition changes. And when you consider something like training and experience and skills, so many employers today are willing to do on-the-job training and even support that skill development as well. And so we think that changing that definition and making it more useful will help. And then also I think we talked a little bit about focus. I heard the cabinet talk about focus, but we think a very robust job referral program is going to be so important. And I'll point out South Carolina has a great program. One of the things that they do is they actually pair jobs with claimants by region. And so they know the claimant's skill set and what their experience is, and then they know what the job entails, and they can actually match them. And they're sending out numerous emails to claimants so that they're actually getting those jobs that they can then go and apply for. And I think that this could be really useful. And what we have found at the chamber, we initiated a program called Who's Hiring at the start of the pandemic. And over the last year and a half, we've seen over 100,000 jobs processed through Who's Hiring. Employers will get in there and will upload their jobs, and then people will search for jobs through this system. And we decided that it's really great. It's such a great system. We want it to be sustainable. And so we have rebranded it as Talent Hub. And it's a searchable portal where you can search by region, by sector of the economy, even if you're looking for a fair chance or second chance employer. You can search for all of that. And so perhaps there are ways, if not through our programs, through the Kentucky Chamber Foundation, but through other associations or other types of products that can be purchased off the shelf, perhaps there are ways to improve the robustness of the job referral program and kind of build on maybe what was started with Focus. And we're happy to continue to have those conversations with you in the cabinet as well. But also we think that the cabinet should update its online portal for employers that report candidates who refuse a job offer. We know that this does not create an automatic termination of benefits. We know, and I think the cabinet spoke to this, that if there's information coming in, they have to process that and investigate it and determine what's going on. But we do think it's an important thing, because what we are hearing from employers is that you might have a job fair and 300 people sign up and then maybe 50 show up. And so, there's this disconnect between, well, I signed up for it, but didn't attend. And so we think that there could be improvements there for how employers share that information and how it's embedded in the cabinet's audit process as well. We also think that we can look for ways to just strengthen and increase the frequency of the auditing process to make sure that these work search requirements are being fulfilled. And, we're happy to continue to talk to the cabinet about it. I do want to acknowledge that, in many of these instances, we're talking about resources and what can we do with the resources available and what could we do with additional resources. And perhaps once the portal, the new system is built, and we're happy to be helpful as we can, and to acknowledge that with resources that we have, we can maybe only go so far. But we do think it's important that there be, going forward, this focus on work search and helping people find jobs and become reemployed as quickly as possible. This is an element of the broader workforce challenges that we have in Kentucky. And so when we talk about workforce at the chamber going into the legislative session, it's not just one bill that we think we can pass to deal, or that you can pass to deal with our workforce challenges. We're going to be coming at this from multiple angles. And so these are the recommendations that we have, Chair and members of the task force, for improving the workforce piece of the unemployment insurance system in Kentucky. And with that, I'll stop and take a break and answer any questions that you all might have.
Our first question is from Senator Yates. Senator Yates, if you'll ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Shanks, thank you for presenting today. I know this is the conversations that so many of my colleagues have had. But one of the issues, obviously, is how slow the process has been for the UI benefits. And so as we work to try to improve things, my concern is that resources, you hit the nail on the head. I know that currently, I think the cabinet has 2 individuals who are actually reviewing as far as the application process to make sure they're doing job search. And so if we're going to increase that and change that, I would think that we would have to put considerable resources in place to do that. And I would believe that I guess my question would be, would the chamber support that, kind of channel the resources to that, to have the auditing process, but also making sure the system's built out in a way that complies. You talked a lot about other best practices in other states that have done a good job. And the job pairing, I think it's a really great resource that helps people, especially who may not be as savvy, doing the research as others. But again, I'm thinking resources and money and time. And so for the past couple of years, that most of our phones have rung off the hook because of the issues for the lack of resources, because the system's not up to date. And so I guess the question would be, would the chamber fully support the making sure all the resources are there that we could do this? And I guess that kind of putting that out to my colleagues, that we all shake our head, yes, we want to do these things, but in order for them to be accomplished correctly, we'll have to pay for them. And I think the cabinet would need substantial resources to do so. And if you could do a comparison of some of the other best practices that you've looked at, whether it's North Carolina or whether it's done good, maybe what their cost, how many people they have in place, and what we'd have to do to mirror that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I appreciate the Secretary's reference to building the church for Easter. As Catholic, I can relate to that concept. But, I think the resource question is a legitimate one. And I think the challenge is that, as I mentioned, we've dealt with the emergency of the UI system because of this pandemic. And then going forward, well, what's the system look like? And what do we need to be sustainable going forward? And I will point back to those 2019 numbers, and those numbers are what got the chamber so concerned that we had such a long duration spent on unemployment, the longest in the nation. And so I think our position on work search is really, it's significant regardless of the pandemic, because what we're focusing on now are some sustainable changes that we can make going forward in hopes that we never see this type of economic hit like the pandemic again. You don't know, but we know there will be a downturn at some point in the future. For the resources, we're happy to focus on what it might take and what it would need to support that, and how we can reshuffle potentially resources in a way to address workforce challenges around the UI system. And I think what I will tell you on behalf of the business community is this is such an important issue for our members that you will see the chamber rolling up their sleeves on our workforce challenges for now until, we can really get our head above the water. I mean, we are in a very difficult situation. And so if we have to look at resources and potentially how we can put those resources into work search or get just more generally getting people reemployed, I think you'd see the chamber very eager to support that.
I would love to work with you in the future on that.
Does that, Senator Yates, does that conclude your questioning?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, yeah, absolutely. I look forward to working with the chamber and the Shanks on hopefully accomplishing some of those objectives. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I didn't want to cut you off.
No.
Co-Chair Nemus.
Yes, Kate, thank you very much. I appreciate the specific suggestions and not some broad ideas which we usually hear. And I'm willing to work with you once again on the bills that we had suggested and a lot of things that we need to do. Because if we get the fund up to snuff, then that's a whole lot less unemployment taxes that Representative Pratt has to pay and all the businesses in Kentucky, and I'm sure he'll be very happy with that. The work search activity, not work search, I'm totally in favor of. That goes with training and education and that, because if it's just the work search as we do now, it's a total useless time spent. And so to just say you have to go for work search as it's defined now, 5, 10, 15 a week, as opposed to one, is, in my opinion, a waste of time. We'll just be hiring a lot of people to check if you actually did that or not, instead of actually solving the problem. So I really like changing it to work search activity. Now, the Chamber's report comes in at the end of November. We're concluding the task force next month, but we can still include a lot of that. So I encourage you to get with our staff and bring forth many of those suggestions and that, so we can include them possibly in the task force findings.
Yes.
I'm going to preach just a little bit real shortly, Mr. Chair, on before the pandemic and after the pandemic. We have a skills and education lack. We had plenty of jobs before, and we'll have plenty of jobs after this pandemic, but we don't have the skills to fill them. So with what we're trying to do, what we were trying to do, and the Secretary was saying they're going to continue this or kick it back into gear with the career centers, to be a one-stop shop to get your skills, education, and training for the jobs that are available now. And that's where we need to go, and I'm glad that it seems that everyone is on board with that. Now, Senator Yates brought up the funding. We know that the legislature already put some money back when I was in the cabinet for the computer system, and by going into the career centers, we're utilizing a lot of the facilities we have now instead of just throwing money at new facilities and things. Yes, we probably need to hire a few more people, and it will cost a little more money, but I think that we can address this without just throwing money at the problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Oh, Representative Pratt, sorry.
Thank you, sir. Kate, thank you, and thank everything the Chamber does for all businesses across the state, large and small. You're a great advocate. You're always there to make sure that we get our voices heard. And you're right. We do need to work on this. And I think something we're missing here is that if we solve the workforce participation problem we have here in Kentucky, we don't need the unemployment office to keep expanding. We don't need to keep hiring people. I mean, this will solve itself. So again, I think this is something we really have to take a look at. And I do want to thank you about the new portal. And I have a question about that. Will the new Kentucky Talent Hub online platform enroll all Kentuckians receiving UI in order to match these individuals to job opportunities? If not, why? I'm trying to make sure the state is not duplicating services and funding. And what funding services was used to design the portal?
So the Talent Hub portal is built through our foundation. And, you know, I could get you more information on the source of that. And it was built based on the needs of employers and our members. So it wasn't designed around the unemployment insurance system, and it exists separate from that. And it's simply a resource where we decided during the pandemic when, you know, we were seeing people losing their jobs, but also we had jobs open, that we were trying to say, okay, well, if you've lost your job recently because of the pandemic, but we have employers that have positions open, we just want to bring everybody together. So of course, from the chamber's perspective, it was a need that we saw for our members. And so it's not a system that at this point, I think, talks to the UI system. I think it would be interesting, though, if at one point in the future it was able to do that through the new portal or, you know, through some other system. I know that South Carolina does that, and I can send you more information on their work search and how they pair people with jobs. But there's a technological piece that makes that happen. So I'm not sure how we would go about doing that, but I think it'd be interesting to talk about. Because it's Talent Hub it's here to stay. It's something we're going to continue to invest in from the chamber, because we know it's something that our members benefit from, as well as individuals looking for jobs. And again, it's another piece of that workforce equation that we're trying to solve.
Yes, and thank you guys for putting together. Glad you guys have rolled this out. But it would be great if we could get to work together so that we're not duplicating services and we can get people back working here in the state of Kentucky. Again, thank the Chamber for everything you do for businesses small and large across Kentucky. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Kate, thank you for coming and presenting recommendations for this committee to consider. I think since March of 2020, the one thing that we've seen is everything that's gone on has highlighted the need for us to take a deep look at our unemployment insurance system in this state, and that was the purpose of this task force, and that's what we're attempting to do. So I want to thank those that have made recommendations today and in the past. So thank you, Kate, for being here.
Thank you so much, Chair.
We now will move to our last presentation for the day. Joe Horvath, Senior Fellow with the Foundation for Government Accountability. If you'll come forward. Joe, prior to speaking, Senator Alvarado has a comment that he'd like to make. After he's finished, if you'll introduce yourself for the record, and then you may begin your presentation for the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know it's often when we get into a lot of these task forces and we hear a lot of testimony, it's easy to lose focus a bit. I did ask the chairman really if we could have FGA come and present today. So I would encourage all members really to listen carefully to this presentation. I think as we're looking, a lot of our focus has been often on the Department of Labor, how things have been handled. I know I'm looking at how things have been handled in the past, and we're critical of that. There are a lot of reforms that we can do within UI that's going to make it more sustainable, and it makes sense. I heard bits of this presentation just a week ago. When I heard it, I reached out to the chairman and said, I think our members need to hear this. So I would encourage everybody just to listen up. I think there's a lot of common sense stuff that's going to be about to be presented. So Mr. Horvath, if you'd like, please, thank you.
Yeah, yes, sir, and thank you for the invitation. Again, my name is Joe Horvath. I'm a senior fellow with the Foundation for Government Accountability, and I feel like I'm already starting on the wrong foot here because this is absolutely not a 101 group. I use the same title slide. I really shouldn't have. This should, advanced PhD level. So good morning. First, I'd like to thank the committee for allowing me to speak with you this morning. And over the past 18 months, we've learned quite a bit. We've learned unemployment systems are incredibly vulnerable to fraud, to the tune of billions of dollars nationwide. We've learned that the federal government will ignore state legislatures and meddle with your benefits whenever it wants. We learned that when people are offered $1,000 a week to not work, it's tough to get them to come back to work. So, all in all, we learned that our systems are insolvent, our taxes are going up, and our small businesses are having a hard time hiring. But other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? So I'm Joe Horvath. As I said, I'm a senior fellow with the Foundation for Government Accountability, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to policies that reduce dependency and improve opportunity. So just going to walk you really through what we're going to do. Some of this is going to be basic, but first I'm going to talk about what unemployment is and what it is not. Then we'll briefly talk about why UI policy matters beyond just the program itself. And then last and certainly not least, we'll get to why we're here. 3 steps to reforming your system. So then first, what is unemployment? Now, this is going to be review for some of you. I know that after listening to you for the past hour and a half, but that's okay. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So first, UI is assistance for workers laid off through no fault of their own. Generally, if you quit or if you're fired for cause, you're not eligible. Now, it's intentionally temporary and intentionally limited in amount. That's the incentive to get back to work. And then lastly, it's a system funded by Representative Pratt's business taxes. So let's look at the opposite, though, what unemployment is not. Because something to keep in mind that while good UI policy leans into what a system is, bad policy tries to turn it into what it's not. So what is it not? Well, it's not long-term full wage replacement. It's unemployment compensation, not universal basic income. It's not economic development. If assistance programs drove the economy, 2020 would have been a much better year for America. And lastly, it's not paid for by workers. It's not something people are getting back what they paid into for, because they, except in a few states, they don't pay in anything. So now we've established some of the basics. Why does it matter? Because I've heard legislators in other states, not this one, say things like, well, it's run by the governor and the agency. We aren't really involved in that. And I guarantee you, I don't see anyone here who would agree with that. So why does it matter? Solvency. The representative from the chamber, you guys, will not be a surprise to any of you. The health of your trust fund matters. So trust fund solvency is measured on a 50-state and territory basis by the federal government. And for a lot of states, it's looking just like 2009. And Kentucky's no exception, suffering a year-over-year drawdown of more than $590 million. And that number comes from the annual USDOL Trust Fund Solvency Report that they do for all the states and territories. But it's not just formulas and solvency. There are real on-the-ground effects of policy, too. Who here has seen a help wanted sign recently? Well, unemployment policy contributes. Every UI claim represents someone not working, the cost of which risks higher taxes. And when businesses have higher taxes, there's less money for that restaurant to hire another server or for the garage to buy itself a new lift. So let's talk about taxes a bit. In addition to solvency, the federal government tracks unemployment taxes among the states. And doing a 50-state comparison, looking at employer contribution rates, Kentucky would rank 27. Now, this is not to contradict the 49 ranking that Tax Foundation provided to the chamber. That's absolutely correct. I know Jared over there, they do great work. So we're measuring different things. So to say, the good news is that for average contributions, you're mediocre. The bad news is that the Tax Foundation has you guys rated at 49 for the structure and how it's built. Now, now we take a look at Florida. They're number 1, and it's not even close. And we can find out how they got there shortly. Your goal as lawmakers should be threefold: solvent system, more jobs, and low taxes. And guess what? You can get there in 3 easy steps. 1, benefit reform. Everything flows from this. If you design your benefits smartly, they're going to help you these next 2 fall into place. And the next 2 are 2, emphasizing jobs. The goal of unemployment must be reemployment, just as the gentleman before said. And then 3, protecting your system. No more waste, fraud, or abuse. There are proven methods and models for all of these, starting with the most important, benefits, and the single highest impact reform you can do, indexing benefits to the state unemployment rate. And it's a beautifully simple idea. If your state's unemployment rate is 5.5% and jobs are plentiful, people can collect unemployment for 3 months. Every half-point increase in the jobless rate, you add a week, and some states max out at 20. So who's done it? It's a popular concept. When Tennessee passed it this year, they became the 9th state to use unemployment rate as a factor for benefit duration. This idea passed the Missouri House last year, as a matter of fact, and while I'm not a gambler, if I was, I would wager that it passes Missouri this year. And there's also legislation that is being looked at by the leadership in Ohio, West Virginia, and Indiana for the upcoming session. Now, Tennessee may be the newest state to index, but I wanted to start with the best example, Florida. Their results were so remarkable that it inspired other states like Georgia and North Carolina. So what happened? Well, let's go back to 2011, the tail end of the Great Recession. Florida's trust fund was broke. People were on unemployment for too long, and taxes looked like they were going up. They were desperate for answers. I'm sure some of that's sounding familiar to some of you in this room. So in 2012, they passed indexing, and the results were dramatic. The time people spent on unemployment was cut in half. They went down to less than 10 weeks on average. And because people were spending less time on unemployment, program costs went down. And because program costs went down, that allowed taxes to go down 70%. And, I know what you might be thinking. Of course things got better. Their economy improved. Did they do any better than other states at the same time? Well, we looked at that. It turns out Florida outperformed every non-reform state too by basically the same margins. Half the time on unemployment, 70% lower spending, 70% lower taxes. Better yet, we did projections to estimate the impact of a Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee style indexing system for every state that currently doesn't do it, including Kentucky. So what are your results? We did these projections in January, so if Kentucky had indexed then, the trust fund would grow by $567 million in 3 years, while simultaneously taxes could go down 17%, and the average time on unemployment would go down 4.6 weeks. So just to recap, I already said benefits are the big one, and that's true. But while indexing may be the best way to help people get back to work quickly, it's not the only tool at your disposal. So what about jobs? The federal definition of unemployment eligibility is able to work, available to work, and actively seeking work. What does that mean? It just means you're looking for work. You're looking for a job. So let's make sure people on unemployment are actively forging their path back to work. And there's a few good ways to do that. When people apply for unemployment, make sure two things happen. Collect the proof of their work search or work search activities, and make sure that the Labor Cabinet is actively verifying all of it. Just an example of why this matters and why it's helpful. There was a study done in Utah a few years ago to see whether people were really looking for work. When people were about to exhaust benefits, meaning their work search wasn't really meaningful or effective, the state asked them to participate in job search training. 31% of claimants dropped off instead of doing it. So those people largely fell into two camps. One, those who weren't actively looking for work in the first place. Or two, those who decided it was just easier to get a job than participate in the training. So 1 out of 3 people, when told they had to look for work, decided working was less work than not working. Also, a lot of states have pretty long lists of what satisfies work search activities, and you've heard a lot about that already this morning. I'll give you some examples from other states. In South Carolina, all you have to do is look at a job posting. Just look at it. In Iowa, if you update your resume by a few keystrokes, that counts. In some states, just registering for a job board or a social media website count. Just registering, not using. Those aren't good enough. That's like saying you need to go to the gym 4 times a week, but then putting on your gym shorts counts for one of those 4 times. So you should make it simple and only accept activities that will lead directly to a job. So a good list is South Dakota. What they do is interviews, applications, state-sponsored training, RESEA, that kind of thing. It's a short list, a short, effective, verifiable list that actually leads to work, right? Because it's not just about cutting the amount of things that count. It's about making things that are meaningful count. Because your unemployment system only works if people are looking for work. So help them look for work. But what if someone turns down a job? This is going to be a quick one because you've already talked about it, and the idea is very simple. If you turn down a job in general, you're no longer eligible for unemployment. So all you need to do as a legislature is encourage employers to report it and make sure the agency enforces it. One of those steps is, of course, building a more robust system that the previous speaker from the chamber mentioned. So that's a quick one. We'll go through that. She also mentioned the South Carolina-style job referral system, and I could not be more pleased that she brought it up because Director Elsie's doing a great job down there. It's a new idea that was created in response to COVID. South Carolina found that people weren't getting back to work fast enough, so they created a simple solution. They had employers advertising jobs, and they had unemployment claimants looking for jobs. They just connected them. If someone gets a lead on a job, they are required to do the interview. If they don't, they have just decided for themselves that they're not actively seeking work. This idea is crucial because it helps people who need help, and it motivates people who need motivation. And it also sounds like some basic infrastructure is already built in this state. There's activity done by the Labor Cabinet, and the Chamber has tools. So to some degree, some of this work is just ready to be put together, made mandatory, and codified. And now, the last three of these steps isn't going to surprise you. So that's jobs. The last three of the steps is not going to surprise you, but it's important. Protecting your system. And I suspect all of you here would agree that only eligible people should collect benefits. And well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's not what's been happening the past 18 months or even 18 years in most cases. During COVID specifically, about as much as $400 billion was taken, with some estimates saying that 70% of that money left the country entirely. But thankfully, there are simple, popular, federally recommended reforms sweeping the country, and we have Kentucky to thank for a lot of that. You were the first state to pass many of these reforms in 2021. I won't go through them because you know them, because you did them. But I do want to show you who followed your lead. If you look at this map, Louisiana did it in a special session a couple months before you. You were the first to do it in a regular session in 2021. And after that, West Virginia, Ohio, Vermont, Montana, Kansas. So it was fantastic progress. You were very clear this year that you don't want to be giving unemployment compensation to people who aren't eligible. Just like fraudsters always look for a new way to cheat, though, there's always a new way to close those holes. So even if you're one of the states that did some of these measures, there are more newer things that you can do today that just make sense. Identify suspicious cases. During COVID, professional fraudsters found vulnerabilities in systems. Some people sent claims to all 50 states using one address and one bank account. All your agency has to do is identify accounts using the same address, same bank account, same IP address, or foreign IP addresses, and weed out the fraud. And of course, the cabinet before testified much to this effect. Multi-factor authentication is another thing they brought up because identity theft, there was a huge breach in Kentucky. And then last, but I think this is certainly not least, this one punches above its weight. When someone commits fraud, take them out of the system. A 5-year lockout is smart, but it's also fair. We don't want to reward fraud. So remember, unemployment is not a long-term entitlement program. It's not a workforce development program. It's not economic development. Good unemployment policy isn't easy, but it is simple. I promise you, if you keep your state's system limited to its actual scope and follow these simple reform steps, you can increase solvency, get people back to work faster, and make your state an easier place to hire workers. And if I could just go ahead, there were some questions that were brought up that I think are worth mentioning. Senator Yates, you mentioned something about resources. You're not here, so I don't know where to look, but and I don't know the extent to which Kentucky has spent down its federal money provided by the first COVID relief or the more recent one under President Biden. But federal regulations have made upgrading your systems, both general welfare, unemployment, allowable expenses for that money. So whatever's left, you can contribute to those kind of efforts to build more robust systems. And wanted to mention the work share program that the cabinet before mentioned. That's not policy that FGA has worked on a lot, but I will say generally supportive of it. It's a good idea. You saw the number of states that did it. The last two did it in response to COVID. Georgia and West Virginia created legalized work share, I guess is one way to look at it, and made it part of their systems. Because yes, it's in some cases it means there are more people on unemployment, but the more important thing is more people are working, and it's a voluntary arrangement with the employer. And then Representative Pratt, we had the conversation about public employees, filing for benefits, and there was the back and forth about whether you're part-time, full-time. It was allowable under the federal programs, but that's kind of the problem, right? The real issue that we found for the past 18 months or so was federal meddling in state legislative affairs, right? Creating new benefit systems and using the unemployment benefit program for something that was never intended to do. So I'll tell you, just to go back in time for a second, I'm probably using a lot of your time, but unemployment was created as part of the 1935 Social Security Act, and the very first guy put in charge of it by the very conservative president, FDR, said explicitly, unemployment is a bridge between jobs, and it's not a full-time wage replacement, and it's not disaster relief, right? It's not intended to cure all ills, because you need that incentive to get back to work. So creating a system out of nothing, sweeping in all sorts of new workers that were never eligible before, it created stress for your cabinet. It created stress for your agency. It created stress for your workforce. I think it was the wrong way to do it. So I wasn't going to bring it up, but there is a bill moving through the Ohio legislature right now that would require legislative approval for participation in any kind of programs like that in the future. So it came up, so I figured I'd just mention it to you. There was just a hearing on it yesterday, actually. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I just wanted to get out as much as I could.
Joe, I think we're going to have a couple of questions here.
Yes, sir.
I do have one that I want to lead off with. What's the dollar amount for solvency for the state of Kentucky and our UI trust fund?
Oh, right now, well, so I'm operating on.
Well, not what is this? What is the level that we should reach when the federal government, U.S. Department of Labor, looks at us and says you have a solvent?
Yeah.
Your funding is good.
As referenced by the chamber earlier, they use a ratio, the average high cost multiple. It's break it down the most simplest way I can. What they do is they look at your average expenditures they take a 20-year window and they say, what are the highest 3 spending years for the past 20 years? And that's one part of the factor. The other part of the factor is how much money do you have in your trust fund and can you cover that? And then they come up with a ratio that, 1 is kind of the magic number there, and they have an annual report. They list all 50 states and all the territories, and they say, how close are you? And the chamber was right to say that Kentucky hasn't hit that number since 1976, and you're tied with Ohio at least, if that makes you feel any better, and Pennsylvania's worse, but almost no states have a track record like that. So in terms of raw dollars, I couldn't give you the raw dollar amount, but that average high cost multiple of 1.0 in the average annual report, that's what you want to shoot for, because that's what's going to guarantee that you can get interest-free advances from the federal government for the next downturn, and that's going to help employers avoid tax increases.
I think Senator Nemes may have a good
answer. Before the pandemic, it was 1.2 billion. It went up from 800 million, and or I think we had somewhere around 800 million. We were getting close to that, and we were very happy about that because then the taxes, the unemployment tax rates for the employers were going down, and some employers it was going to be zero. So we were real happy about that. Now, what it is now, I don't know if they're going to throw that pandemic in there to make it more than that, but right before the pandemic, it was 1.2 billion, and we were close to doing that. With the legislature putting some of the COVID money or allotting some money to redo the fund, I think that will help to get us that back up to that par quickly.
Senator, I'm sorry.
Well, for context, right now, USDOL has you at a 0%. So I mean, improvement is needed, and one-time investments from some of that federal dollars are helpful, but really structural reform. We've seen a number of people in a number of states finally get to the point where we need this thing to be sort of built a little smarter, so that God forbid there will be a future downturn. You need to be able to meet that too.
Senator Alvarado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this all intrigued me with the idea of indexing, which I think makes complete sense. And I've been reaching out to some folks about considering preparing something to propose that as and I'm sure our task force, when we discuss our recommendations, I would urge members to really, I know we've been talking about a lot of other things as far as modernizing the system and workforce. This will be one of the bigger things we could do really to improve UI in the state, to make it sustainable, to make it better across the board. So I would encourage all members when the time comes to that discussion to include that. But how many states total have implemented indexing? Have they all seen the same kinds of results that we've seen in Florida? And is there any resistance, or what? I'm sure there's always somebody in opposition to something that you propose. So I'm curious about things that you've heard in terms of opposition to these proposals in the past.
Absolutely. So I'm sorry if I'm giving anyone a headache with this rapid clicking here. Here we go. So this is a list of states. Now, just to give you an idea, the federal government gives you broad provisions that you have to sort of guidelines they have to stay within, but states are left to sort of build and administer their systems. They're given pretty broad leeway. So these states all use unemployment rate as a factor in determining the number of weeks someone can collect, but the way they build it is a little different. So I'll give you an example of states that are sort of a cohort and built it very similarly, and then some other examples, because let's not talk about Massachusetts. They use it to actually add weeks. Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Alabama structure it very similarly. So they, but not exactly the same, right? So North Carolina is 12 to 20, flat, that's it. Alabama, I think, is 12 to 20 with a 5-week option if you are participating in work search training. Georgia, I think, is 14 to 20, and then Florida is 12 to 23, something like that. So they're all ballpark close to each other. Kansas and Arizona have higher floors, slightly higher ceilings. That was just a political reality. Arizona just passed it last year, and that was the deal that their legislators felt comfortable working with. I don't remember the weeks on that. Idaho uses a few variations. Now, the states that recently passed this, Tennessee, Alabama, Arizona, there were issues with making sure that their systems could do it, making sure that their agencies, so the agency would come in and say, our system is capable of this, is not. Wisconsin's exploring indexing, and one of the things they're doing right now is preparing a 15-point list of capabilities their system needs to be able to have for policy changes they want to make, including indexing, including job referral systems. And they're going to use federal money, state money that they appropriate to make sure that their system, as they get updated, can do all 15 of these things that they want to do from a policy standpoint. So in terms of support versus opposition, there's a bit of a wide range. So in Florida, this was the chamber, as I understand it, it predates me a little bit, and I didn't work in Florida at the time. But this was the chamber's baby, this indexing bill in Florida at the time. They were driving it from start to finish. Hesitance and opposition comes from the agency's ability to do it, or maybe in some cases worrying about workforce training and making sure that people have suitable jobs that are available to them. So that's how Alabama, they took that option and they added the few weeks to provide training where needed. But in states where they want to be problem solving, so I'll tell you, in North Carolina, start to finish, the champion said, our system it's not a welfare system, it's not a handout system, it's a temporary bridge between jobs, and they never wavered. So every state's a little different. I would anticipate, assuming that the cabinet in Kentucky has buy-in on a concept like this to increase workforce participation, that would be a conversation you'd need to have. Certain regional considerations. So the United States Department of Labor did not let Alabama, and that was under the Trump administration, did not let Alabama set it differently by region. So they wanted county level indexing. USDOL said no, so that's why they added the 5 weeks. That's a consideration you might want to think about. But there's a number of different. That was a very long-winded answer. I'm sorry. I hope I touched on anything approaching what you wanted.
No, I do appreciate that. I mean, 167,000 job openings right now in the state of Kentucky. I don't think there's a problem as far as finding work.
Yeah.
And really, I think we've been talking about a $47 million enhancement to a brand new computer system in the next 18 to 24 months. So maybe even a consideration if there is an issue with that, since we'll have a brand new, build it up from scratch system that could probably do all these things. Might be a consideration even if we implemented it now to say the date of effectiveness will be when that system is available and up and running in 18 to 24 months. So that's good to hear that opposition, but that would make a lot of sense. So I'm preparing members now. I always talk about a lot of things I'm looking at filing. So just to put the word out that I have a member of leadership here as well, I just think this makes a lot of sense. And if we're seeing our neighboring competing states economically starting to do these things, I think it behooves us to take a look at things that make us competitive, because we're going to lose competitiveness as well in the region if we don't do something like this.
And Senator, modernization, sorry, but just one last thought. Modernization is the name of the game, right? We're talking about that for program integrity, but if you think about the modern economy, right, with a few keystrokes, just this morning before I came over here, I just went on to Indeed and looked at how many jobs there were in Louisville, Lexington, Covington, Frankfort. We're talking, I think Louisville was 33,000 jobs in a few keystrokes. Now, admittedly, I don't know how to do all those jobs, and I don't know what the feasibility is, but jobs are out there. And in a modern system, the idea that the standard baseline is that you need half a year to find a job, I just think that's outdated thinking. This a half a year meaning the standard 26 weeks that most states use.
We have two more questions. I have a 12 o'clock meeting. Representative Pratt, would you ask the first question and try to keep it brief?
I'll try my best to be brief. Statement. Actually, part of your statement about the people file claims, I actually misspoke that. I looked at my notes wrong. It wasn't that they were allowed to have they claim part-time. They claim part-time jobs they never had on that. But anyway, that was my fault doing that. But, we took a run at UI several years. I think it's 2018. And I think this number is still correct. Of all the states that touch Kentucky, we pay the most and the longest and have for a long time. So that's part of the problem. And I'm going to be honest, as an employer, and listen to people across the aisle, I'm glad we rolled out what unemployment is and isn't today, because a lot of my friends across the aisle viewed UI, or unemployment benefits, as the new welfare program. And that's the way they're running it right now. And that concerns me gravely. That's not what it was supposed to be. That's not what it's developed to be. But that's the way it was run during COVID, and we got to get away from that. And thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Senator Nemes will have the final question.
Senator Alvarado, I pushed this bill in 2018, Representative Pratt. So with all the problems we had, and Ms. Shanks also said that, so we're going to try to do that again and work with you on that. It was funny, on some of it, the chamber fought me, and my own administration, the Bevan administration, kind of put a nix to it, because a lot of things we wanted to do was to index down, and they wanted to index down so quickly that it was against the federal rules that would, you know what I'm talking about. And what I want to do is give a little bit more up front and index it down, because if you're losing money each week, it gives a great incentive to go back to work.
Just to be clear, Senator, you mean the benefit paid, not the benefit duration. Yeah,
that's correct.
Yeah.
Another thing we wanted to do with it is, if you took a job and in training, we did not want to cut off the benefits, and we were having a problem with that, because if we cut it down, maybe, but to help subsidize the employer and the employee while they're getting training, has other states been able to do that?
There are, I would look into that more for you, but that is ringing a bell. There are states that take the reemployment very seriously. I think South Carolina might be one of them.
All right.
But that's a very important part of it, because as the cabinet said, it's
Thank
about
you.
reemployment.
I get the chairman to his meeting. So,
oh, sorry.
That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Very good discussion. Thank you, Joe, for being here and
Thank you.
presenting. Seeing no other business, we had a very good discussion today on issues affecting unemployment insurance. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Motion is second. We are